Part 1 of a live recording from the Kitchener-Waterloo Centre of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada on episode 300 of the Actual Astronomy podcast. This episode was recorded live via Zoom on February 10th, 2023 from the Kitchener-Waterloo Centre of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada to celebrate our 300th episode and to bring a bit of an astronomy club experience to our listeners. We had some technical issues and not everything went as planned, but in the end, after chatting with Shane, we agreed that this is a great episode, and we only wish we could have recorded it longer. We hope you enjoy part 1 of this episode, featuring Ellen, who talks about observing comet E3 ZTF, as well as 96P McColl's, followed by a conversation with Michael, who recently received his 12-inch telescope. Welcome to a live recording that we're doing at the Kitchener-Waterloo RASC Centre for the 300th episode of the Actual Astronomy podcast. I'm Chris, joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who love looking up the nighttime sky, and this podcast is for anybody else who likes going out under the stars. So here we are doing a live show finally, Shane, even though we're still on Zoom.
Yeah, well, we've talked about it for quite a while, so I'm pretty excited for this. This is a neat experiment and a neat opportunity. I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and thanks to Trevor and Michael and the KW executive for entertaining my wacky idea and going along with this crazy experiment. So I was a member of the KW Center quite some time ago, and it's always such a fun club to belong to, and some of my fondest memories of observing and hanging out with people under the stars are from the KW times. And if it was cloudy, sometimes we'd head down to the Hoother and just have a beer instead.
Tonight, we have a series of short conversations that we're going to have. So we're going to talk to Michael, who recently had first light with his 12-inch reflector. Then we'll talk to Marie, who's doing some really interesting lunar observing. And then Peter, who, Chris, I understand is an old observing friend of yours and builds some very large telescopes. So that's always interesting too.
Yeah. And I keep trying to convince Peter to come out here with his 24-inch. So fingers crossed we can make that happen. For a long time, the KW Center ran 2 monthly meetings. One of those meetings was a regular club meeting. The other was the meeting they called the Stargazing 101 meeting. I understand it recently ended. Actually, I went via Zoom to the last one. I only attended the regular meetings for a while, and I mistakenly dismissed those other meetings as like a beginner's group and maybe something that was really entry level. But one night a friend of mine was talking and said, "Hey, you should come check this out. It's a lot of fun." And we all go for beer and ribs afterwards. So each meeting was informal, and the invited speakers were just people from the club, and people get up and talk about observing whatever they were doing, maybe looking at Mars, doing some sketching, telescope building. And sometimes during the meeting, you'd even get like astronomy book reviews, and everything was pretty much done by club members, though the odd time they'd invite in a guest speaker. And the way they ran the Stargazing 101 meetings was they would begin the brief introduction, and then they would just ask what people have been observing. So kind of in that light, I've modeled our podcast a little bit after that. So people might see that as a sort of an homage to what they were doing with the Stargazing 101. We've recently had this comet E3 ZTF, and we've had a few images come in from Ernie and Mark. They're the people who most recently sent us a couple images. Ernie, today I was talking to you, beautiful image on the left side showing comet E3 ZTF, and really liked the colors of the stars that he is in the image here. And you can see the ion tail, you can see the dust tail streaming out. And then Mark, a couple of weeks ago, or about a week ago, sent us this other image. And on the far right, this tiny little one, I couldn't make it any smaller. This is my sketch from last evening when I was observing, when it was minus 13, minus 20 with the wind chill. And I was just using my little 60 millimeter Takahashi and 25 power, and showed a nice little tail on that. Ellen Papineau, we're going to invite you to be our first person to talk on the show with us here tonight, because I understand that you've recently given a comet workshop and have some slides to share and some information about comet observations tonight.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for having me. It's been okay. So this is a photo of me being frustrated with the comet, the weather, and the flu that I had this last week, when it finally got clear after 3 weeks of being cloudy with only a few holes that I missed. And basically, it's a comet E3ZTF discovered in 2022. We also call it Zwicky now. So just to let you know, and sometimes I refer to it as a fluffy because it is quite fluffy. And there was another comet called Mechels 96P. It became magnitude 0, but it was way too close to the sun. So that was the end of that. And let me see here how to get it forward. Yeah, there we go. I have a photo here that shows NEOWISE of July 2020 and our current fluffy or Zwicky. And it's like a big, huge comet. And we have to know that NEOWISE was actually way, way, way smaller than Hale-Bopp in 1997. So it was already a smaller comet. And then Zwicky is basically like a pinky fingerprint compared with that. And this photo, if it gets shared, it's by Rutger Bus in the Netherlands. Now, why is it so good to see this comet? Well, it is from far. It is 420 billion kilometers where it came from. And it's basically now coming close to us with 40 million kilometers. So it's not that close, but it is close. Now, Fluffy's photons will hit our eye, our retina, and those photons are actually particles. And it is like you make a physical contact with this comet that came from so far. So that makes it actually special, and that is quite something, isn't it? Now, there might be people that don't know what comets are. They're coming from far, from the Oort cloud, which is about 500 billion kilometers away and farther than that. When comets are somehow bumped into, it is a big cloud that actually made the solar system. That is where we are made from. The inner solar system is made from all that dust. And there's not that much left anymore in our inner solar system, but there's still a big cloud out there. And Zwicky was a long periodic comet with an orbit of every 53,000 years it would come by. But what Jupiter and the other gas giant planets are doing with their gravity is changing the orbit. And in this case, it wasn't captured more, like other comets sometimes happens to, but it was kicked out and it won't be back until in a million or more than a million years. Comets are made, you hear about dirty snowballs, and basically made of all the stuff in the cloud. So there's particles dislodged from the comet, and then there's a tail that is pushed away from the sun because the sun is pushing it away with the solar wind and the radiation. Zwicky was actually ideal because it became circumpolar, which means that after a while it was visible all night long. And we have a map here that shows it. The light curve, it was expected to be coming almost naked eye. However, that sort of barely happened, but it is basically diminishing now in around 7 magnitude, which is binocular. Zwicky's anti-tail was visible in this picture by Chris Schur. The coma is all green because it contains diatomic carbon and is agitated by the UV light of the sun. And when we go through the plane of the comet, we can see all the dust that is gathering in its orbit, and that's why there was an anti-tail. And here is a picture of comet E3 or Zwicky and comet U2. U2 is much dimmer than Zwicky is. So kissing comets, they call it. And then Mechels was there. And Mechels is a periodic comet of 5.3 years. But we were very unfortunately located compared with Comet, and the Comet was very close to the Sun seen from us, but it was very close. It was 1/3 of orbit of Mercury, and it is a sun grazer. So it was very close to the Sun, so we didn't see it, but somebody made a picture, and that is by Michael Jaeger in Germany. And he took one picture of the comet when it was less than 15 degrees away from the Sun. So that's quite a feat, because it was very hard to see that. Now here we see by the orbiting solar and heliospheric observatory, the Sun is covered up here in this picture, but you see the comet approaching. And then you see also that the tail indeed is pointing away from the Sun. So that was it for this. On the observing part, I've seen it on the 15th of January with Marie, who's doing the moon talk. And that was the last time that I saw it, dimly, because it is very just a very gray little patch. So don't think you see a light bulb in the sky, because it is not like that. Anyway, I have here some sources that I will also share with the group here, and I can send it to you too, Chris.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for that, Ellen. Appreciate it. All right, maybe what we'll do is just see if anybody else had any observations that they would like to share. Michael, I see you've taken yourself mute. Go for it.
Well, I did see the comet twice. I went out last week, and it was -18 plus wind chill, and I started getting frostbite trying to get in my telescope. I had seen it in the binoculars, so I knew where I was trying to point it, but I couldn't get it. So I was very frustrated because I needed to go in. But I went out again on Monday night, and it was only -5. So I was able to take my time, and it was an easier part of the sky. I'm not really familiar with the circumpolar sky around Ursa Minor, but in Auriga, I'm very familiar with that part of the sky, and it was very close to Zeta Aurigui. So I just pointed the telescope right there with the finder, and there it was. And it was the 12-inch, so you could see the ion tail just faintly. Nice. And it had a nice fan shape. It was really mostly just the nucleus and the coma that you could see. It took averted vision and some patience to see sort of some detail in the tail, and the ion tail was very, very faint.
Well, that you've seen that, it is quite something, Michael.
It was wonderful.
What power were you using, Michael?
About 46 power.
Okay, right on.
Michael, you were actually the most recent organizer / host of the Stargazing 101 meetings, and you've delivered a whole variety of talks. So welcome to the podcast. Appreciate having you on.
Thanks, guys. As a listener, I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, and excited to hear about your scope, and super excited to see some of your sketches. So we mailed quite a bit since late last spring, and you caught my attention because you were observing from a site that I think I located when I was living in Kitchener-Waterloo and doing my astronomy there.
Yeah, the site that you found near West Moncton, between Listowel and Stratford, is a great little observing site at the end of a dirt road in the middle of the country. The sky's somewhere between a Bortle 4 and a Bortle 3.75, maybe something like that.
Yeah.
You got the KW light dome to the east southeast, and a little bit of one from Stratford to the south, but otherwise the skies are quite nice there. And I've spent a lot of time logging hours under the stars at that site. So thank you for finding that.
Yeah. Does it still have the big cement pad at the end of it?
Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah.
I remember Clark, who's there at KW telescope. He and I went observing there one December or January, and that whole top was covered in ice, and it's a little bit of a drop off the edge of it. So we were trying to be pretty careful in making our observations that we didn't plunge to our deaths.
Yeah, and as you know, that road snows in the winter too, and
Yeah.
I've gotten stuck, so you got to be careful.
Exactly.
Right on. Well, maybe what I'll do here, folks, is I'll share my screen again because we have some of your sketches, Michael, and I think a photograph of your 12-inch. And maybe just to kick off the conversation here, would you mind just telling us a little bit about the 12-inch, just some of the details?
Well, I'm, I guess, almost 41, and since I was 14, I've had a 4.5-inch Newtonian, and that I pushed that scope to the limits over the last few years, trying to eke out every last thing I could see with it. And sketching became a big part of my routine to try and catch more and more detail. And I was always, I love hunting down galaxies and faint things and pushing my limits. So I knew I needed to get something bigger. And I'm at the 40 years old, so I didn't want to just jump up to an 8-inch. I wanted to go all the way to a 12-inch so I could really enjoy some deep views and see what kind of detail I could see and bring to my sketches. So I ordered the telescope way back in April 2022, and because of all the delays that we have right now with the supply chains in astronomy, just like everything else, it took until the beginning of December for the telescope to arrive.
Oh, wow.
So, and then of course we had cloudy skies.
Yeah.
Of course, because when you spend $2,500 on a telescope, the nature does not want you to use it.
Mm-hmm.
But I did manage to get out on my balcony about a week after. I live in an apartment. About a week after the telescope came in, and I just did some beginning of observations of Jupiter, of Saturn, of the Pleiades and the Hyades, and the Orion Nebula. And even through, the Bortle sky of right in the heart of Kitchener, I was seeing detail on the planets that was just astounding me, and just sort of some crisp detail, and the number of stars that I could see in the Pleiades and the Hyades was just spectacular. And when I got to the Orion Nebula, I was kind of like, I don't know, I was disappointed because I knew if I got out to a dark sky, I'd be seeing more, but it was sort of one of those, the thing that I noticed the most was that it was green. And I've heard before that, if you have good enough night color vision, you can catch hints of green in the Orion Nebula, but this wasn't just a hint of green. It was green. And I was astounded at just how clear the color was. So I'm looking forward to looking at other things that I might be able to catch some color in now that I have this large scope. I've since been out a couple times with it. I managed to get out, I believe it was January 18th. And that was my first dark sky night at the Moncton observing site that Chris had found. And that was just an absolute wonderful evening. And it made me very glad that I spent the money on this telescope. It was worth every penny. We started off, I had brought some friends with me just to give the thing a good christening. And we checked out the usual suspects like the Andromeda Galaxy and Triangulum and the Orion Nebula, and they all had, just this wealth of detail. Sometimes things that I'd seen before, but that I had to struggle to see, but now they were just so easy and so clear. But also other things, using a nebula filter, I was able to pick out the spiral structure of M33 of the Triangulum galaxy much easier than I had expected, because usually there's sort of these vague hints of spiral arms. that you can get in 4.5 inch. And, you know, there was more of that in the 12 inch. But then when I put the nebula filter on, it just felt really obvious. And that just must be because of the light from the gas in the spiral arms coming through more easily. I spent some more time that night looking at other things, a couple globular clusters, and then moving on to Hubble's variable nebula, which looked different than I remember. Not much different, but I look forward to checking that out more often, because it does change over time as the star moves through the dust cloud that it's in. And then I spent a lot of time on the Rosette Nebula to make a sketch. That was very rewarding. Just the amount of detail that I could see, faint parts of gas that, you know, I'm used to seeing in astrophotographs, but I had never dreamed that I would be able to pick it up just with my eyes. So that extra aperture really helps, and spending time at the eyepiece with these things really helps. But I guess the highlight of that evening, though, was catching the Horsehead Nebula, which I didn't think I was going to happen. I sort of had it in the plan to take a look, you know, to maybe give it a try, but I don't have an H-beta filter. It's just a narrowband Orion Ultra block, similar to the UHC filter from Lumicon. And, you know, I pointed my telescope at the right place. I knew where I was supposed to be looking. There's this trapezoid of stars that kind of surround the emission nebula IC 434. And it's kind of in the middle, but slightly to the north end of that trapezoid. And then there's this little T shape, or at least it looks like a T shape to me, of these faint stars that kind of points right at the south end of the head. And when I was looking with the filter, I could clearly distinguish an area where there was just nothing there. And surrounding it, there was just this faint glow. So I take that as that I nabbed it. It wasn't, you know, a clear, distinct outline of a horse head shape. It was just more the absence of something from there. But I think that's probably about as good as you can get in a 12 inch.
Yeah, wow.
On that target.
Yeah, all of the sketches here. So, you know, Hubble's variable. I forget what the one on the top right is for NGC number, but Huygens region there, the Rosette, and then the Flame Nebula and the Horsehead. Your sketches are wonderful. First of all, you know, they're really,
Thanks.
really good, and the detail you captured in that Rosette Nebula is just outstanding. You kind of have me longing to get a 12 inch again, even though I had one and sold it. It's really incredible how much detail you've picked up, and it looks like you have a really good performing telescope. Is the focal ratio on that like around f5?
It's f4.9, yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Just a little under f5.
Yeah. And this is the Skywatcher Flex tube. So the upper tube assembly slides up and down the trusses, or I guess the trusses sort of slide down into the lower tube assembly. Is that correct?
Exactly. It's really it packs down really well. I can fit it into the tube into the trunk of a Honda Civic, and then the base goes into the back seat. And then I can take it wherever I need to. That was something I was worried about actually when I was getting it. Was I going to be able to fit it into this car? But it worked out, thankfully.
Yeah, that's awesome. How do you find it holding collimation throughout the night with that type of design?
So I haven't really had too much of an issue with it. Although I wasn't being super picky about the collimation yet. It's been a snap to get it into collimation at the beginning of the night with a laser tool. Like having only used it 3 times. The last time I took it out just on Monday, it took me maybe 2 minutes once everything was put together and it was pointed or put together to once I got the laser in, it was less than 2 minutes and I had it in collimation. So at least getting it there is a snap. So if I have to adjust it once or twice a night, if it's a long night, 4 hours or 5 hours, then that's fine.
Do you find balances, like, I don't know how big the eyepieces you're using, but do you find you have to like adjust the balance or anything like that when you're
So I've been using the Batter Hyperion line of eyepieces. I just purchased a whack of them as a kind of good mid-range eyepiece. So they're not as heavy as sort of your big Televiews, your Ethos and that sort of thing, but they are heavier than Flossels. And I haven't had any problems with it. For the 5mm, I've just adjusted the tension setting a little bit. So add a little more tension if I'm pointing a little bit low, but it hasn't bothered me yet. So
yeah, super interesting too to hear the color that you were able to see in M42. That is something too that still kind of stands out in my memory of when I had a 12-inch telescope, was that the green certainly did start to pop for me as well. It'll be interesting to hear if you're able to tease out some of that color in other brighter nebula throughout your observing days here in the future. Hopefully you see a little bit more of that.
Yeah, I'm really curious about how the Lagoon Nebula and the Trifid Nebula are going to look this summer. Even on stars, I've noticed that I notice more color in the stars than I used to. Even when I was looking at the comet, the color of Zeta Aurigae was quite striking. It was a kind of an orangish star. Yeah.
I like the sketch you did there of the rosette. I really like like the breaks in the wreath of it. I always think of that almost as like it's like a zoomed in visual observation of the Trifid. It has sort of those same hallmark divisions, like Trifid, and then with the I think it's NGC 2244 cluster at the center. Yeah, done.
They took some patience to get out, because when you're first looking, you see the cluster, of course, and then you see the rim of nebulosity around the cavity that surrounds the cluster really well, because it's this bright milky silk that's kind of surrounding that cluster. But then if you're patient and you're using averted vision and you take the time to kind of survey and pay more attention to certain areas over the others, you start seeing kind of these differing amounts of brightness and these subtle details in the shading. But you really have to spend some time with it and work for it. These kinds of details aren't things that you just see just at a glance. You have to spend time with the objects, and learning to be patient while I sketch has helped me see all of these things. Before I was sketching, I was a pretty impatient observer, and it was, spend 30 seconds on a target and then it was time to move on to the next thing. But now when I really find something that I want to sketch, I can sit there for a half hour to an hour and be perfectly happy looking at the same thing the whole time, just so I can catch those details.
And I see you're using a UHC filter there for the rosette.
The filter helped with the detail for sure. In this case, it gave a little bit more contrast than just the view straight through. Apparently the rosette is great with an oxygen 3 filter, and there's even more details that you can tease out, that if you take out the hydrogen beta line that the UHC filter lets through, you can get even more subtle shadows from some of the Bok globules and some other things in the nebula.
Wow. Even more detail would be incredible, because that's amazing. And, I really appreciate your comment too, Michael, just around kind of the acquisition time or time at the eyepiece. And, that allowed you to see all of that detail. It's a great way to observe. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So now that you've had the scope out a few times, is there any upgrades or modifications that you're considering?
Right now, I want to fill out my eyepiece set so that I can really push the magnification for planetary nebulas. Right now, I can get up to 150 power, but I was trying to see the Spirograph Nebula, and I could tell it was a planetary nebula, but I couldn't really see any detail in it because it was just so small. And with this much resolving power, I should be able to push it to 300 power at least on a good night. So I definitely want to get some small focal length eyepieces to bump the magnification up. I've actually added a laser pointer for outreach purposes. I'm the club's outreach coordinator, and people are always asking me, so where exactly are you pointed in the sky? So I had that laser pointer on my Newtonian, my 4.5 inch. So I just got a second mounting saddle for it and put it on the 12 inch. So that was kind of the first major upgrade. But right now I'm pretty happy with it as it is. I I don't know, maybe I'm not one of those people who's just ultra picky about their telescope, because I spent so many hours fighting with my old Newtonian that I'm just used to not having everything exactly perfect.
Well, and really, a lot of these telescopes, especially at that price point, come out of the box, with a lot of great functioning parts that, you don't really need to do much to them. And, your sketches certainly prove that out. It's a great performing telescope. So congrats on that. That's awesome.
Well, thanks, Shane.
Yeah.
I look forward to many, many years more observing through this telescope.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been great. Really appreciate the conversation and sharing the sketches here, Michael. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So a question on the Horsehead before we go and take some Q&As. Was that your first time observing the Horsehead? And
yes,
that
was my first time. And that was why I had strong doubts that I was going to see it, because I had a vague idea of what I was going to be looked for just from pushing the limits of my old telescope, that it was going to be like just this on the edge glow for IC 434, and then I was going to be looking for an absence of glow. And I think because I've spent so much time with that 4.5 inch looking for galaxies and nebulas that really were pushing the limits of what that telescope could do, I was well prepared for even with an upgrade, looking for a target that was still on the edge of the capabilities of the telescope.
Nice, very nice, beautiful sketches. Always love getting sketches in my inbox from listeners, and it's sort of been nice to go from just chatting via email and now talking to you in person several times and lead up for this. So thank you so much for helping set this up this evening.
It's been wonderful. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Do we have any questions before we move ahead for Michael? Yeah, go ahead. I see Richard there. You've got a question. Yeah, I'll just ask you to unmute. Go ahead and unmute. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hi, Michael. I actually have the 10-inch version of Michael's telescope, so this is kind of cool. I just wonder how much more powerful the extra 2 inches are. But my question, Michael, is how much viewing time do you get before you need to adjust the coordinates, like when it's out of the direct eyepiece or the telescope?
So basically, how much time before the object is moving out of the field of view? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
It depends on what power I'm working at. Like at 36 times or 42 times, which are the two lowest powers that I have with the current eyepiece set that I have. I can go a good 30 seconds before I need to bump the telescope. But with the at 150 and 220 power, it's much more frequent, like every 5 seconds that I'm giving the telescope a little bit of a bump. So when I'm looking at the planets, it's, almost continuous, where I'm making small adjustments when I'm looking at high power. But it hasn't bothered me, because I was used to, with my old telescope, even though it was on an equatorial mount, I was used to using the slow motion controls to make continual adjustments in that one. So far that hasn't really made much of an impact or a change to my observing.
Well, good for you. Patient. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I see Trevor's made a comment here. Says, awesome portfolio you're going to have. And I think you made some very smart choices in eyepieces, says Trevor. Thanks for the comment, Trevor. Any other questions or comments for Michael? I think it's pretty cool. I like the sketching. Kind of gives you that sort of grounded view, and then you have I think a matching set of observations from your 4.5-inch reflector. So you upgrade it from the 4.5 to the 12-inch. So I think that's a good jump.
I love it.
Very good. Okay, well, with that then, we're going to thank Michael. Well, that's it for part 1 of our 300th episode. Special thanks to KW Center President Trevor Chandler and our friend and loyal listener, Michael Wright, as well as the KW executive for agreeing to all this. Also, thanks to KW Telescope, the local astronomy store there, who hosted people in person for the event. We really appreciate that. So if you get by Kitchener, Ontario, KW Telescope is in the Manitou Mall now, right across from the Subaru dealership in South Kitchener, so not too far off the 401. We're always happy to receive feedback and observing reports, as well as your questions to actualastronomy@gmail.com.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.